It began with a simple parking dispute, the kind most neighbors would laugh off and forget. But in this neighborhood, controlled by an HOA president with a taste for power, nothing was ever simple. Rules became weapons, fines turned into threats, and what should have been a peaceful community twisted into a battlefield. Then one night, the stakes escalated in a way no one saw coming when strangers in uniforms appeared at the door, demanding more than just compliance. But what happens when petty control games spiral into something far more dangerous? At first glance, the neighborhood looked like the picture of suburban perfection. Rows of manicured lawns stretched endlessly, each blade of grass trimmed to a precise height. Matching mailboxes stood like sentinels at the edge of every driveway, and identical street lamps cast a warm glow at night. It was the kind of community designed to look flawless in photographs, a place where order was everything, and every detail seemed carefully controlled. For Sarah and her husband Michael, moving here felt like a dream finally realized. After years of renting small apartments, saving every spare dollar, and sacrificing vacations and luxuries, they had finally managed to buy their own home. It wasn't the largest house on the block, but it was theirs, a 2-story with pale brick, wide windows, and enough space for their 2 children to have rooms of their own. To them, it wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of years of hard work. Sarah loved walking barefoot across the hardwood floors she had once only admired in magazines. Michael took pride in pulling into the driveway after work, knowing his family had stability. For the kids, it was a place where childhood could finally feel wide and open, with bikes in the cul-de-sac, sleepovers in the backyard tent, and chalk drawings on the pavement. Life unfolded in simple, beautiful routines. Mornings began with the soft sound of sprinklers misting across lawns as Sarah brewed coffee and packed school lunches. The kids would race out the door, backpacks bouncing, laughter trailing behind them. Evenings were spent on the back patio, the air filled with the smell of burgers on the grill, cicadas humming in the distance, and neighbors waving as they walked their dogs. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. And good was all Sarah had ever wanted. Still, in neighborhoods governed by homeowners associations, peace always came with a fine print. The HOA here was quiet, almost invisible at first. Board meetings were held in the community clubhouse, but few attended. Rules existed, but they seemed harmless. Keep lawns maintained, trash bins stored, paint colors consistent. To newcomers, they were presented as safeguards to preserve property values and keep the neighborhood looking uniform. But beneath the surface, longtime residents whispered differently. At block parties and casual chats near the mailbox, hints slipped through. A woman down the street had once been fined for planting roses outside the approved color palette. Another had received a warning letter because her teenage son parked his truck in the street overnight. Even harmless things, wind chimes, garden statues, a mismatched curtain visible from the road had been used as grounds for reprimand. Most brushed these off, calling them minor inconveniences or the cost of living somewhere nice. But Sarah noticed the unease in their tone. The way they laughed nervously before changing the subject. At first, she dismissed it. Her family followed the rules. Her flower beds were tidy, the kids' toys neatly stored, and the trash cans always pulled in by dusk. What could the HOA possibly have against her? Yet small cracks began to appear, the kind only someone paying close attention would notice. One morning, she caught sight of a board member's car rolling slowly past her home, the driver lingering just a little too long as his eyes swept over her yard. Another day, she overheard 2 neighbors talking about a couple who had nearly lost their home after mounting fines spiraled out of control. Then there were the notices, little slips of paper some families whispered about receiving, folded neatly inside envelopes marked with the HOAS seal. They were never shared openly, But the fear they carried was obvious. People lowered their voices when they spoke of them, as if the letters themselves had power. Still, Sarah carried on. She watered her flowers, walked her kids to the bus stop, and waved politely when neighbors passed. She told herself not to overthink it, that these stories were exaggerated, that her family would never become a target, but the signs became harder to ignore. Neighbor across the street, a quiet man who kept to himself, suddenly stopped tending to his yard. Within days, a letter appeared taped to his door. Not long after, a moving truck was parked outside, and his family was gone without a word. Another time, Sarah left her garden hose coiled on the front lawn overnight. The next morning, she found an anonymous note tucked under her welcome mat. A sharp reminder about community standards written without a signature. The neighborhood still looked perfect, but the perfection no longer felt comforting. It felt heavy, like a performance everyone was forced to maintain. Sarah began to sense that life here wasn't about peace or community, it was about control. Every cheerful wave from a board member, every car that slowed in front of her house, every polite smile from a neighbor now carried an edge of suspicion. And though she tried to push the thought away, the unease grew stronger with each passing week. The community that once promised safety now felt like it was quietly watching her, waiting for the smallest mistake. And when the first official letter finally arrived, crisp white paper sealed in the HOS emblem, Sarah understood what her neighbors had been warning about all along. It was only the beginning. The first envelope came on a Wednesday afternoon. Crisp, white, stamped with the HOAS seal, it looked official but harmless. Inside, Sarah found a single page citing a violation: her flower bed. The marigolds she had carefully planted were not an approved color for front yard landscaping. She read the letter twice, baffled. Was this serious? A warning over flowers? At first, she laughed it off, assuming it was a mistake. Surely no one could care about something so small, but unease lingered. She tucked the letter into a drawer, telling herself not to worry. Yet before she could forget it, another envelope arrived. This time, it was about her trash bin left at the curb 2 hours past the acceptable window. The warning carried a fine of $50. Sarah's smile faltered. This didn't feel like coincidence. Soon, the letters multiplied. A forgotten garden hose coiled by the porch. A patch of grass deemed too long after a week of rain. Even the family's mailbox, slightly tilted from a delivery truck bumping into it, became grounds for another violation. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, the words sharper, the tone colder. It wasn't just the paper. It was the eyes. Sarah began to notice cars slowing as they passed her home, board members leaning just slightly toward the window, scribbling in notebooks. Once, she caught a man she recognized from the HOA committee snapping a picture of her driveway before driving off. The message was clear. They were being watched. At night, Sarah lay awake listening for the sound of tires crunching gravel, convinced another set of eyes lingered outside. Even Michael, usually calm, grew tense as fines stacked one after another. Their savings account, once meant for family vacations and home improvements, started draining into checks made payable to the HOA. Still, they tried to comply. The kids were told to keep their bikes in the garage. Lawn care became an exhausting routine, with Sarah cutting grass twice a week just to avoid another citation. Decorations, once cheerful touches of personality, were removed entirely. But no matter how much they obeyed, the notices kept coming. The house that once felt like freedom was turning into a trap. Neighbors noticed too, though few dared to speak. Some gave Sarah sympathetic glances, their expressions saying what their mouths could not. Others grew distant, crossing the street instead of walking past her yard. Fear had spread, and no one wanted to risk becoming the next target. Then came the first serious fine, $250 for repeated violations of lawn maintenance. Sarah nearly choked when she opened the letter. The lawn was flawless. She had mowed it only 2 days before. Yet the notice included photographs, close-up shots of a single, brown patch of grass near the edge of the driveway. Someone had gone out of their way to document it. It felt deliberate. Michael raged, his voice echoing through the kitchen. "This isn't about grass," he said. "This is about control." And deep down, Sarah knew he was right. The harassment grew bolder. A neighbor she once considered friendly suddenly reported them for improper storage of outdoor equipment. A garden shovel, leaning against the shed, was enough to trigger yet another fine. Sarah saw the neighbor watching from across the street as she retrieved the letter, his face unreadable. The isolation tightened. Invitations to block parties stopped arriving. Children who once played with hers were suddenly busy. At the next HOA meeting, her name was mentioned openly, cited as an example of known compliance. Though she wasn't present, word spread quickly, whispers at the school pickup line, glances exchanged over grocery carts. Sarah's family had been branded as troublemakers. One evening, returning from the store, she froze. Parked a few houses down was the same board member's car, its headlights dim, a camera lens barely visible in the fading light. He was photographing her property. She stood in the driveway gripping her groceries, fury and fear colliding inside her chest. The moment she made eye contact, the car pulled away. Her sanctuary no longer felt like her own. The fines escalated. $500. Then $750. Every letter struck like a blow, draining not just money but dignity. Sarah began dreading the walk to the mailbox, each step heavy with anticipation of the next punishment. Her children started asking questions. Why can't we leave our bikes outside? Why don't the neighbors wave anymore? Their voices were small, confused, carrying the weight of changes they couldn't understand. Sarah tried to reassure them, but inside she was unraveling. Nights turned sleepless, mornings anxious. Every shadow cast across her yard felt like surveillance. Every sound of tires outside made her heart lurch. The house that once symbolized freedom now felt like a prison. But in the depths of despair, something shifted. Sarah began to document everything. Every letter was carefully filed, every fine photocopied, every photo of her supposed violations countered with her own. She snapped pictures of her yard after mowing, recorded dates and times, and even began journaling the sightings of board members near her property. It was exhausting, but it gave her a sense of control, a way to fight back, even quietly. Still, the HOA was not finished. One Friday afternoon, a certified letter arrived. Unlike the others, this one required a signature. Sarah's hands shook as she opened it. Inside, the language was different, colder, more threatening. The letter claimed that if unpaid, her mounting fines could result in a lien against her property, even foreclosure proceedings. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't about flower beds or grass anymore. It was about her home. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Michael tried to stay strong, but Sarah saw the worry in his eyes. Their children sensed it too, their laughter quieter, their games shorter. The family that once thrived in this house now moved like shadows through its halls. The HOA had crossed a line. Sarah knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. She began researching her rights, digging through HOA bylaws and reading stories of others who had suffered the same fate. What she discovered was chilling. Across the country, HOAs had stripped families of homes over fines as petty as weeds, mailboxes, or holiday decorations. The pattern was clear, and she was caught in it. Her fear gave way to determination. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were about to get one. But just as she prepared to push back, another envelope arrived, this one unlike any before. Its contents would shake her to the core, and the battle she thought was about weeds and trash bins would spiral into something far more sinister, because the HOA wasn't finished. They were just getting started. The HOA had played every card they thought could break him. The fines, the threats, the letters slipped under his door at midnight. But when all else failed, they reached for something darker, something desperate. Late one evening, headlights flooded his driveway. A black SUV pulled up, followed by two men in dark uniforms, flashing badges that looked official but felt off. They barked orders, claiming the homeowner was under investigation and that his prized Porsche, his late father's dream car, was being repossessed for community violations. Neighbors gathered, whispers slicing through the night air. The board president stood nearby, arms crossed, smirking with smug satisfaction. This was their final move. Embarrass him publicly. Strip him of the car that had become a symbol of defiance. Crush him in front of the people he lived among. But what the HOA didn't know was that they had walked straight into their own downfall. The homeowner stepped forward, calm but cold. He studied the fake cops carefully, then reached into his jacket. Gasps rippled through the crowd. And then, in a single, undeniable moment, he flipped open his real badge. The words United States Marshal gleamed under the STREETLIGT. Silence. Total. Suffocating silence. The so-called enforcers froze, eyes wide, realizing too late that they had been caught impersonating law enforcement. The crowd erupted into murmurs of shock. Neighbors who had doubted him just minutes ago were now staring at the board in disgust. The smirk on the president's face crumbled into panic as the marshals called in the local sheriff. This was no longer an HOA dispute. This was a federal crime, and the very people who thought they held power had just exposed themselves as frauds. And in that moment, the homeowner didn't just win his battle, he dismantled the illusion of control the HOA had built its empire on. And just when it seemed the HOA had the upper hand, the truth came crashing down in a way no one expected. If you've ever dealt with a nightmare HOA, you won't want to miss how this ends. This is Listen HOA Stories, where the truth about power, pettiness, and justice comes to light. The fallout was immediate and devastating for the HOA. Not for him. The men posing as cops were arrested on the spot, their fake badges confiscated as evidence. The sheriff's department launched an investigation into how deep the HOA's corruption went. For the first time, the balance of power shifted away from the board and back to the very people they were supposed to represent. The board president tried to downplay the situation, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But neighbors had seen too much. They'd watched him smirk in the shadows, orchestrating the humiliation that backfired spectacularly. And now, whispers spread through the community, not of the homeowner's defiance, but of the board's disgrace. Meetings that once drew little attention were now packed with residents demanding answers. Longtime board members resigned under pressure. The president, once untouchable, was removed in a humiliating vote, his reputation shredded beyond repair. As for the homeowner, he didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He had stood his ground, endured months of harassment, and come out not just victorious, but vindicated. His Porsche stayed exactly where it belonged in his driveway, gleaming like a symbol of resilience, but the impact stretched further than one car or one man. Other residents, inspired by his courage, began pushing back against unfair fines and secretive board decisions. The HOA that once ruled with intimidation now operated under watchful eyes. Stripped of its unchecked power, years later, neighbors would still recall the night the truth cracked the facade of authority, when the bully tactics of an HOA collapsed under the weight of one homeowner's refusal to bow. And yet, the story leaves one haunting question: how many others are suffering in silence, believing they're powerless against an HOA's grip? Because for every neighborhood that sees justice, there are countless others where fear wins, where intimidation goes unchallenged. That's why stories like this matter. In the end, justice wasn't just served, it was a warning to every HOA that thought they could bully their way into power. But what would you have done if this was your neighborhood, your family, your home? Share your story in the comments, because here on Listen HOA Stories, every voice matters. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next unbelievable battle with an HOA gone too far.